The autumn rain drummed against the tall windows of Buckingham Palace as Sergeant Thomas Mitchell completed his evening rounds. 23 years of service had taught him to notice every detail, from the precise alignment of picture frames to the subtle changes in the palace's ancient rhythm. Tonight felt different, though he couldn't quite place why. Thomas had joined the Royal Guard fresh from military service, carrying dreams of protecting the crown and serving something greater than himself. His father had been a palace groundskeeper, and his grandfather before him had served in the household cavalry. Royal service ran in his blood like a sacred tradition passed down through generations. The corridors of the East Wing were unusually quiet for a Thursday evening. Normally, staff would be preparing for the next day's engagements, but most had been dismissed early due to what the palace had termed private family matters. Thomas found this curious, as Queen Camilla rarely altered the established routines that kept the royal household running like clockwork. As he approached the Queen's private study, Thomas noticed something that made him pause. The heavy oak door, which was always secured during evening hours, stood slightly ajar. A thin sliver of warm light spilled onto the Persian carpet runner that lined the hallway. This was highly irregular. Palace protocol dictated that all private chambers be secured by sunset, especially those belonging to senior members of the royal family. Thomas hesitated, his hand instinctively moving to the radio clipped to his uniform. Should he report this immediately, or investigate first? His training told him to maintain distance and call for backup, but his experience suggested that premature alarms often created more problems than they solved. The Queen valued discretion above all else, and false alerts were career-ending mistakes. He decided to approach carefully, intending to simply ensure the door was properly secured. Perhaps a member of the cleaning staff had forgotten protocol, or maybe the door's old lock mechanism had failed again. The palace was full of aging fixtures that required constant attention, and doors had minds of their own in the centuries-old building. As Thomas drew closer, he could hear voices from within the study. This was even more unusual. The Queen's evening schedule had shown no appointments, and her private secretary had confirmed that she had retired early with a headache. Yet there were clearly two people speaking in hushed but urgent tones beyond the partially open door. The first voice was unmistakably Queen Camilla's. Even in whispers, her distinctive inflection and careful pronunciation were recognizable to anyone who had served in the household for more than a few months. Thomas had heard her speak countless times during ceremonies, briefings, and casual encounters in the corridors. The second voice was male, cultured, and speaking with the kind of authority that suggested high rank or significant importance. Thomas couldn't immediately identify the speaker, which was troubling. He prided himself on knowing every regular visitor to the palace, every advisor, every family member who might have legitimate access to the Queen's private quarters. Thomas positioned himself carefully beside the doorframe, close enough to ensure security but far enough to respect privacy. His role was to protect, not to eavesdrop, but the unusual circumstances demanded careful assessment. If there was a security breach, if someone had gained unauthorized access to the Queen's private study, he needed to act quickly and decisively. The conversation inside seemed intense but controlled. There were no sounds of distress, no indication of threat or coercion. Whatever was happening appeared to be a planned meeting, conducted in secret but with the Queen's full participation and consent. This realization created a new dilemma for Thomas. Was he witnessing something he shouldn't see, or was he doing his job by ensuring the Queen's safety? Through the narrow gap in the door, Thomas caught glimpses of movement. He could see part of the Queen's desk, where papers were spread across the leather surface. Someone was pointing at documents, gesturing with the kind of emphasis that suggested important decisions were being made. The scene had the feeling of a business meeting rather than a social call, but why would such a meeting be conducted in secret? Thomas knew the Queen's official schedule by heart. Every appointment, every engagement, every meeting was carefully logged and coordinated through multiple departments. The Queen's time was managed with military precision, and spontaneous meetings were virtually unheard of. The royal family's security depended on predictability and careful planning. The rain continued to beat against the windows, providing a natural cover for the quiet conversation taking place inside the study. Thomas realized that the weather might be more than coincidental. Perhaps this meeting had been planned to take advantage of the stormy evening, when most of the staff would be dismissed early and the usual bustle of palace life would be reduced to a minimum. As he listened, trying to determine whether intervention was necessary, Thomas began to pick up fragments of the conversation. Words like arrangement, discretion, and timing filtered through the door. There were references to dates and locations that meant nothing to him, but the tone suggested careful planning and significant consequences. The Queen's voice carried a note of concern that Thomas had rarely heard before. In his years of service, he had seen her handle difficult situations with grace and composure. She had faced public scrutiny, family difficulties, and the constant pressure of royal duty with remarkable steadiness. Tonight, however, there was something different in her voice, a tension that suggested the stakes of this conversation were particularly high. The unknown man spoke with confidence and familiarity, as if he had known the Queen for many years. His references to people and events suggested intimate knowledge of royal affairs, yet Thomas was certain this voice didn't belong to any of the Queen's usual advisors or family members. Who was this person, and how had he gained such private access? Thomas checked his watch. His patrol was running behind schedule, and other guards would be expecting his check-in within the next 15 minutes. If he failed to report on time, questions would be asked, and a search would be initiated. The palace security system left no room for unexplained delays or miscommunications. The dilemma was becoming more complex by the minute. If Thomas revealed what he had discovered, he might be exposing a perfectly legitimate private meeting that the Queen had chosen to keep confidential. Royal family members were entitled to privacy, and their personal affairs were not necessarily the business of the security staff. On the other hand, if something improper or dangerous was occurring, his failure to act could have serious consequences. Inside the study, the conversation took on a more urgent tone. There were references to time constraints and the need for immediate action. The Queen asked several pointed questions about logistics and potential complications. Her mysterious companion provided detailed responses that suggested extensive planning and preparation. Thomas heard the rustle of papers and the sound of a pen being used. Documents were being signed or notes were being taken. Whatever was happening in that room, it involved formal agreements and binding commitments. The gravity of the situation was becoming clear, even though the specific details remained hidden. The sound of footsteps approached the door from inside the study. Thomas realized that the meeting might be concluding, and he needed to make an immediate decision. Should he retreat and pretend he had never been there, or should he remain at his post and face whatever consequences might follow? His training emphasized the protection of the royal family above all other considerations. If there was even a small possibility that the Queen was in danger or being manipulated, he had a duty to intervene. But if his suspicions were wrong, if this was simply a private matter that required discretion, his interference could damage his career and betray the trust that had been placed in him. The footsteps stopped just short of the door. Thomas heard the Queen's voice more clearly now, thanking her visitor for his time and expressing confidence in their plan. There was a warmth in her tone that suggested genuine friendship and mutual respect. This didn't sound like coercion or manipulation. It sounded like collaboration between willing partners. Thomas made his decision. He would observe and protect, but he would not interfere without clear evidence of danger. His job was to serve the crown, and sometimes service required difficult choices about when to act and when to remain silent. The Queen's safety was paramount, but so was her right to privacy and self-determination. As he settled into position to continue his careful watch, Thomas realized that this night would be unlike any other in his long career of royal service. Whatever was happening in that study, he was now a witness to something that would change his understanding of his role and his relationship with the family he had sworn to protect. The palace around him felt different now, filled with new mysteries and hidden currents that he had never suspected. The job he thought he knew so well had suddenly become far more complicated. And Thomas understood that his life as a royal guard was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. The door to the Queen's study opened wider, and Thomas pressed himself against the wall, using the shadows created by an ornate tapestry to conceal his presence. Through the increased opening, he caught his first clear glimpse of the Queen's mysterious visitor, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The man was tall and distinguished, probably in his early 60s, with silver hair and the kind of bearing that spoke of wealth and influence. He wore an expensive dark suit and carried a leather briefcase that looked Italian and costly. But it wasn't his appearance that shocked Thomas. It was his identity. The man was Sir Marcus Whitfield, a prominent businessman who had been publicly critical of the monarchy and had recently been investigated for financial irregularities involving government contracts. Thomas knew Whitfield's face from security briefings. He was on a list of individuals who were considered potential threats to royal reputation, people whose associations with the royal family needed to be carefully managed or avoided altogether. What was such a person doing in a private meeting with Queen Camilla, and why was this meeting being conducted in secret? The Queen moved gracefully around her desk, her evening dress rustling softly as she walked Whitfield toward the door. She moved with purpose and confidence, clearly in control of the situation. But Thomas could see tension in her shoulders that suggested the weight of whatever they had been discussing. "The arrangements will be finalized by Tuesday," Whitfield said in a low voice that carried the authority of someone accustomed to making important decisions. "My contacts in Switzerland have confirmed the account details, and the transfer protocols are in place. Once you give the final authorization, everything will proceed exactly as we discussed." Switzerland. Account details. Transfer protocols. Thomas felt his stomach tighten as the implications became clear. This wasn't just an unusual social meeting. This was a business transaction involving international financial arrangements. The Queen was engaging in some form of financial dealing with a man whose reputation was questionable at best. "I need absolute assurance that this cannot be traced back to the crown," Queen Camilla replied, her voice carrying a steel that Thomas had never heard before. "The consequences of discovery would be catastrophic, not just for me personally, but for the institution itself. Charles and William cannot know about this until it's completely finished." The mention of King Charles and Prince William sent another shock through Thomas's system. Whatever was happening, it was being concealed not just from the public and the palace staff, but from the Queen's own family. The implications of such secrecy were staggering. Whitfield nodded with the confidence of a man who had handled delicate situations before. "My dear Camilla, I've been managing sensitive financial matters for 3 decades. The arrangements I've put in place are absolutely bulletproof. Even if someone were to investigate, which is highly unlikely, they would find nothing but a series of perfectly legitimate business transactions between private parties." The casual use of the Queen's first name confirmed what Thomas had already suspected. This was not the first meeting between these two individuals. They had a relationship that went back years, perhaps decades, and tonight's conversation was part of an ongoing arrangement that had been carefully planned and executed. "The timing is critical," the Queen continued, moving closer to the window where the rain continued to streak down the glass. "The announcement about the foundation's expansion needs to happen first, and then we wait exactly 2 weeks before initiating the transfers. Any deviation from that timeline could raise questions we're not prepared to answer." The foundation. Thomas tried to remember what he knew about Queen Camilla's charitable work. She was patron of numerous organizations and had recently announced plans to expand her educational initiatives. Was this secret meeting connected to legitimate charitable work, or was the foundation being used as cover for something else entirely? Whitfield opened his briefcase and removed a set of documents. Even from his concealed position, Thomas could see that they were formal legal papers with multiple signatures and official seals. "These are the final authorization forms. Once you sign these, the process becomes irreversible. Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Thomas could see the Queen's reflection in the window as she considered her response. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across her features, and Thomas caught a glimpse of the woman behind the crown, someone facing a decision that would have profound consequences. "I've spent months considering every possible outcome," she said finally, turning back to face Whitfield. "This is the only way to secure what needs to be secured while protecting what needs to be protected. Yes, Marcus, I'm certain. Let's proceed." She moved to her desk and signed the documents with a gold fountain pen that Thomas recognized as one of her personal possessions, a gift from King Charles on their wedding anniversary. The irony of using such a sentimental item for whatever transaction was taking place was not lost on him. As the Queen signed each document, Whitfield provided explanations and confirmations. References were made to contingency protocols and emergency provisions that suggested this arrangement was designed to handle some form of crisis or unexpected situation. Thomas strained to understand what kind of emergency would require secret financial arrangements and the deliberate exclusion of other family members. "The beauty of this system," Whitfield explained as he gathered the signed documents, "is that it can remain dormant indefinitely. Nothing happens until you activate it, and once you do, everything moves automatically. You'll have complete control over the timing and the extent of implementation." Complete control. Thomas realized that whatever was being arranged, it was designed to give the Queen independent authority over significant resources without the need for consultation or approval from anyone else. In the context of royal finances, which were typically managed through multiple layers of oversight and approval, this represented an unprecedented level of personal autonomy. The meeting was clearly concluding, but Thomas found himself more confused and concerned than when it had begun. Nothing he had overheard suggested immediate danger to the Queen's safety, but the implications of what he had witnessed were potentially explosive. A secret financial arrangement with a controversial businessman, conducted without the knowledge of other family members, using a charitable foundation as apparent cover, could destroy the Queen's reputation and seriously damage the monarchy itself if it became public. Whitfield prepared to leave, but before he reached the door, the Queen placed a hand on his arm. "Marcus, I need you to understand how much I'm trusting you with this arrangement. If anything goes wrong, if there are any leaks or complications, the consequences will extend far beyond just the two of us. The stability of the crown itself could be at stake." The businessman nodded gravely. "Camilla, you have my absolute word. This arrangement will remain between us until you decide otherwise. My reputation and my business depend on discretion, and I've never betrayed a confidence in my life. You're not just my client, you're my friend, and I would never do anything to harm you or your family." Friend. The relationship between these two people was clearly personal as well as professional. Thomas wondered how long they had known each other and how this unusual partnership had developed. The Queen's trust in Whitfield seemed complete, despite his public reputation and the obvious risks of association with him. As they moved toward the door, Thomas realized he needed to retreat immediately or risk being discovered. His presence in the corridor would be impossible to explain, especially given the secretive nature of what had just occurred. He began to move carefully along the wall, using his knowledge of the palace's layout to find an alternative route back to his patrol area. But as he turned to leave, he heard something that stopped him in his tracks. Whitfield's voice carried a new note of urgency as he spoke quietly to the Queen near the door. "Remember, if anyone asks about tonight, we never met. I was never here and this conversation never happened. The official record will show that I was in Edinburgh on business, and you were indisposed with a headache. Even your private secretary believes that version of events." The Queen's response was equally serious. "I understand the risks, Marcus, and I accept full responsibility for my decisions. This arrangement is necessary, and I won't apologize for taking steps to protect what matters most to me. Sometimes duty requires actions that others might not understand or approve of." Duty, the word that had defined Thomas's entire career, that had brought him to the palace and kept him dedicated to royal service through all the challenges and changes of recent years. Now he was hearing the Queen use the same word to justify actions that seemed to contradict everything he thought he knew about royal responsibility and transparency. The sound of the door opening wider told Thomas that Whitfield was preparing to leave. He managed to slip around the corner into an adjacent corridor just as the businessman emerged from the study. Thomas pressed himself against the wall and listened as footsteps moved away in the opposite direction, toward a service entrance that would allow Whitfield to leave the palace without passing through the main security checkpoints. The Queen remained in her study for several minutes after Whitfield's departure. Thomas could see the light under her door and occasionally heard the sound of movement within. She was clearly dealing with paperwork or making preparations related to their conversation. When she finally emerged, she moved quickly toward her private apartments, her footsteps echoing softly on the marble floor. Thomas waited until the corridor was completely silent before completing his retreat to a safe distance. His mind was racing with questions and concerns that he wasn't sure how to address. What he had witnessed was clearly significant, potentially dangerous, and definitely secret. But what was his responsibility in this situation? What did duty require of him now? As he resumed his patrol route, Thomas realized that his life as a royal guard had just become infinitely more complicated. He was now the keeper of a secret that could shake the monarchy to its foundations, and he had no idea what he was supposed to do with that knowledge. The next few days would test his loyalty, his judgment, and his understanding of what it truly meant to serve the crown. The following morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching Thomas's mood as he reported for his regular shift. Sleep had eluded him throughout the night, his mind churning over the implications of what he had witnessed. Every time he closed his eyes, he could hear Queen Camilla's voice discussing Swiss accounts and transfer protocols with a man who had no business being in the palace, let alone in private consultation with a member of the royal family. Thomas had arrived early, hoping that routine activities might help settle his nerves and provide clarity about his next steps. The palace was already bustling with its usual morning rhythm. Housekeeping staff preparing rooms, kitchen personnel organizing breakfast service, and administrative workers beginning their daily coordination of royal schedules. As he checked in with the duty officer, Thomas noticed an unusual level of activity in the communications center. Several senior staff members were gathered around computer terminals, their expressions serious and focused. Phone calls were being made to various departments, and there was an air of controlled urgency that suggested something significant was happening. "Everything all right, sir?" Thomas asked Sergeant Williams, a veteran guard who had been with the royal household even longer than Thomas himself. Williams glanced around to ensure they wouldn't be overheard, then stepped closer. "There's been some kind of security audit ordered from the top. They're reviewing access logs, checking surveillance footage, and interviewing staff about any unusual activities over the past few days. Word is that someone high up is concerned about potential breaches of protocol." Thomas felt his stomach drop. Could the sudden security review be connected to last night's secret meeting? Had someone else discovered Queen Camilla's unauthorized consultation with Whitfield? Or was this simply unfortunate timing that would make his own situation even more complicated? "Any idea what triggered the audit?" Thomas asked, trying to keep his voice casual while his mind raced through possible scenarios. "Not officially, but the rumor is that it came directly from King Charles's office. Apparently, there have been concerns about information security and the possibility that sensitive royal business might be compromised. They're being very thorough, interviewing everyone who was on duty yesterday evening." The mention of King Charles sent another wave of anxiety through Thomas's system. The Queen had specifically mentioned keeping this arrangement secret from both Charles and Prince William. If the king had ordered a security audit, did that mean he suspected something? Or was this simply routine caution in response to some unrelated concern? Before Thomas could respond, his radio crackled with a summons to report to the security office immediately. His shift supervisor, Inspector Davies, wanted to see him for what was described as a routine interview regarding recent patrol activities. The timing could not have been worse. As Thomas made his way through the palace corridors toward the security office, he wrestled with the decision that he knew was coming. Should he report what he had witnessed, potentially exposing Queen Camilla's secret arrangement and destroying his own career in the process? Or should he remain silent, protecting the Queen's privacy while potentially concealing information that his superiors clearly considered important. The security office was located in the basement level of the palace, in a series of rooms that had been modernized with the latest surveillance and communication equipment. Inspector Davies was waiting behind a metal desk, with a stack of files and a digital recorder that suggested this would be more than a casual conversation. Davies was a fair but thorough investigator who had handled sensitive palace security matters for nearly 2 decades. He had a reputation for getting to the truth while maintaining the discretion that royal service required. Thomas respected him enormously, which made the current situation even more difficult. "Sergeant Mitchell, please have a seat." Davies began formally, activating the digital recorder. "This interview is being conducted as part of a comprehensive security review ordered by His Majesty King Charles. I need to ask you some specific questions about your patrol activities yesterday evening, particularly regarding any unusual observations or incidents." Thomas took a deep breath, knowing that his response to these questions would determine not just his own future, but potentially the future of Queen Camilla and the entire royal family. "I'm ready to answer your questions, sir. According to your shift log, you completed your evening patrol of the East Wing at approximately 21:30 hours yesterday. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir. That's correct." "During that patrol, did you observe anything unusual? Any deviations from normal protocol? Any unexpected visitors? Any irregularities in security procedures?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Thomas could feel his career balanced on a knife's edge. If he lied and was later discovered, he would face dismissal and possible criminal charges for obstruction of justice. If he told the truth, he would betray Queen Camilla's trust and potentially expose information that could damage the monarchy. "The East Wing was quiet during my patrol," Thomas said carefully. "Most of the staff had been dismissed early due to the storm, so there was less activity than usual." Davies made a note in his file, then looked up with the kind of direct gaze that suggested he suspected there was more to the story. "Sergeant Mitchell, I need to be clear about something. This investigation is being conducted with the full authority of the king himself. Any information that might be relevant to palace security needs to be disclosed, regardless of how sensitive or potentially embarrassing it might be. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Thomas understood perfectly. Davies was telling him that loyalty to King Charles took precedence over any other considerations, including loyalty to Queen Camilla. The implication was clear. If Thomas was protecting information that the king needed to know, his silence would be considered a betrayal of his oath of service. "I understand, sir. May I ask what specific concerns prompted this investigation?" Davies hesitated, clearly considering how much information to share. "There have been indications that unauthorized individuals may have gained access to restricted areas of the palace. We have reason to believe that sensitive royal business may have been discussed with people who lack appropriate security clearance. The king is particularly concerned about the potential for information leaks that could damage royal reputation or compromise ongoing initiatives. Unauthorized individuals. Sensitive royal business. Information leaks." Every phrase seemed to describe exactly what Thomas had witnessed the previous evening. The question was whether Davies already knew the specifics and was testing Thomas's honesty, or whether the investigation was still gathering information and Thomas's testimony could be crucial. "Inspector, if I were to have observed something unusual, something that might be relevant to this investigation but also potentially sensitive regarding a member of the royal family, what would be the proper protocol for reporting such information?" Davies leaned forward, his expression intensifying. "Sergeant Mitchell, are you telling me that you did observe something relevant to this investigation?" Thomas realized that he had reached the point of no return. His question had essentially confirmed that he possessed information relevant to the inquiry, and attempting to retreat now would only make his situation worse. "Yes, sir. I believe I may have witnessed something that relates to your concerns. Please describe what you observed, in as much detail as possible." Thomas took another deep breath and began his account of the previous evening's events. He described discovering the unlocked door, hearing voices from within the Queen's study, and recognizing both Queen Camilla's voice and that of an unidentified male visitor. He explained his decision to remain nearby to ensure the Queen's safety, and his growing concern as he realized the meeting was both secretive and involved sensitive business matters. As Thomas spoke, Davies took careful notes and occasionally asked for clarification about timing, locations, and specific details. When Thomas reached the point of describing the visitor's identity and the nature of the conversation he had overheard, Davies stopped writing and looked up with an expression of serious concern. "You're telling me that Queen Camilla was meeting secretly with Sir Marcus Whitfield, and that their conversation involved financial arrangements and Swiss bank accounts?" "Yes, sir. They also discussed the timing of some kind of announcement related to a foundation, and Whitfield emphasized that the meeting needed to remain completely secret, even from King Charles and Prince William." Davies was silent for several long moments, processing the implications of what Thomas had reported. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that suggested the gravity of the situation was even greater than Thomas had realized. "Sergeant Mitchell, what you've described has significant implications for royal security and family relationships. Sir Marcus Whitfield is currently under investigation by several government agencies for potential financial crimes, including money laundering and tax evasion. Any association between him and a member of the royal family could create serious legal and political complications." The full scope of the crisis was beginning to dawn on Thomas. This wasn't just about Queen Camilla's privacy or her right to conduct personal business. If Whitfield was under criminal investigation, the Queen's association with him could implicate her in illegal activities, regardless of her actual knowledge or involvement. The monarchy itself could be drawn into a criminal scandal. "What happens now, sir?" Thomas asked, dreading the answer but needing to understand the consequences of his disclosure. "Now, Sergeant Mitchell, this information goes directly to the king, and decisions will be made at the highest levels about how to proceed. Your role is to maintain absolute confidentiality about this conversation and to continue your normal duties as if nothing has changed. Do you understand?" Thomas nodded, but he felt anything but normal. In the span of 24 hours, he had gone from being a routine palace guard to being a key witness in what appeared to be a major royal scandal. His decision to report what he had witnessed felt both necessary and devastating. As he left the security office, Thomas realized that his relationship with Queen Camilla would never be the same. He had betrayed her trust in order to serve what he believed was a higher duty, but the personal cost of that decision was only beginning to become clear. The next few days would determine whether he had protected the monarchy or helped to destroy it. The palace around him seemed different now, charged with hidden tensions and unspoken questions. Every person he passed might be involved in the investigation, every conversation might be monitored, and every action might be scrutinized for signs of disloyalty or deception. Thomas had thought that serving the crown would be straightforward, but he was learning that loyalty itself could be a more complex and dangerous thing than he had ever imagined. 3 days had passed since Thomas's interview with Inspector Davies, and the palace atmosphere had become increasingly tense. Staff members whispered in corners, normal routines were disrupted by unexpected meetings, and there was a sense that something significant was happening behind closed doors. Thomas tried to maintain his regular duties, but every interaction felt loaded with unspoken questions and hidden meanings. On Wednesday morning, Thomas was summoned to an emergency meeting in the king's private conference room. As he made his way through the state apartments, he passed portraits of previous monarchs who had faced their own crises and scandals throughout British history. He wondered if any of them had dealt with situations as delicate and potentially explosive as the one currently unfolding. The conference room was already occupied when Thomas arrived. King Charles sat at the head of a polished mahogany table, his expression grave and focused. To his right was Sir Geoffrey Hampden, the private secretary to the king, and to his left was Inspector Davies. At the far end of the table sat a woman Thomas didn't recognize, though her expensive suit and authoritative bearing suggested she was a senior legal advisor or government representative. "Sergeant Mitchell," King Charles began, his voice carrying the weight of both authority and concern, "please take a seat." We need to discuss the information you provided to Inspector Davies regarding Queen Camilla's activities. Thomas sat down, feeling the full weight of royal attention focused on him. He had served the crown for over 2 decades, but he had never been in direct conversation with the king about matters of such sensitivity and importance. Sir Geoffrey opened a file and consulted several pages of notes. Sergeant Mitchell, we've conducted a thorough investigation based on your report. We've confirmed that Sir Marcus Whitfield was indeed present in the palace on the evening in question, having gained access through a service entrance using credentials that were provided to him in advance. We've also verified that the financial arrangements you overheard are real and substantial. The woman at the end of the table leaned forward. I'm Margaret Thornberry, legal counsel to the Crown. The situation we're dealing with has implications that extend far beyond palace security. Sir Marcus Whitfield is currently the subject of multiple criminal investigations, including charges of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to evade taxes. Any financial relationship between him and Queen Camilla could implicate her in these criminal activities. Thomas felt his stomach tighten as the full scope of the crisis became clear. This wasn't just about royal protocol or family disagreements. This was about potential criminal behavior that could destroy the monarchy's reputation and perhaps result in serious legal consequences for Queen Camilla herself. King Charles spoke again, his voice heavy with the burden of the decisions he was facing. Sergeant Mitchell, what you witnessed appears to be Queen Camilla's attempt to establish secret financial arrangements that could be used to move substantial sums of money without proper oversight or legal scrutiny. While we don't yet know her specific motivations, the methods she's employing are deeply troubling. Inspector Davies consulted his notes. We've traced the Swiss bank accounts mentioned in their conversation. They're part of a complex network of financial instruments that could be used to hide assets or facilitate money laundering. Whether Queen Camilla intended to participate in illegal activities or was simply naive about Whitfield's true nature, her involvement puts the entire royal family at risk. Thomas struggled to process what he was hearing. The queen he had served and respected for years, the woman who had seemed so dignified and careful in all her public and private dealings, had apparently entered into arrangements that bordered on criminal behavior. How had someone so experienced in royal protocol made such dangerous decisions? Your Majesty, Thomas said carefully, may I ask what actions are being considered? What will happen to Queen Camilla? The king's expression darkened. That, Sergeant Mitchell, is the most difficult question we're facing. We have several options, none of them pleasant. We could report this matter to the appropriate authorities and allow the criminal justice system to proceed, which would likely result in Queen Camilla's arrest and prosecution. We could handle the matter privately, which would require her immediate cooperation in dissolving these arrangements and accepting significant restrictions on her future activities. Or we could attempt to contain the situation while conducting our own investigation to determine the full scope of her involvement. Margaret Thornberry added, each option carries enormous risks. Public prosecution would create a massive scandal that could severely damage the monarchy's credibility. Private resolution might be seen as covering up criminal behavior, which could be even more damaging if it eventually became public. And continued investigation prolongs the period during which these arrangements remain in place and potentially active. Thomas realized that his role in this crisis was far from over. What do you need from me, Your Majesty? Sir Geoffrey answered. We need you to continue monitoring Queen Camilla's activities without appearing to do so. We need to know if she has any further contact with Whitfield or attempts to activate these financial arrangements. Most importantly, we need to determine whether she's acting alone or whether others are involved in these plans. The assignment felt like a betrayal of everything Thomas thought he understood about his role as a royal guard. He was being asked to spy on Queen Camilla, to monitor her private activities and report on her personal business. The oath-hee-ha behind the golden walls of Buckingham Palace, where tradition meets modern royalty, secrets are currency and trust is a luxury few can afford. What happens when a loyal guard stumbles upon a conversation that could shake the very foundations of the British monarchy? Sometimes the most dangerous discoveries are the ones we never intended to make. In a world where every door has a purpose and every room holds memories of centuries past, one unlocked door would change everything. This is the story of duty versus conscience, of loyalty tested by truth, and of how a single moment can transform an ordinary guard into the keeper of an extraordinary secret. The crown has survived wars, scandals, and revolutions, but can it survive what lies behind a door that should have remained locked?